I've always heard people throw around the phrase, high school is some of the most formative years of your life, which to middle school me was blasphemous. I'd already decided that my current girlfriend would be my wife, I would always only listen to Green Day, Korn, and All American Rejects, and my favorite show was going to be Attack on Titan forever. I also had very strong opinions on poetry and a very limited view on what media I wanted myself to consume. Now, to my surprise, high school was in fact some of the most formative years of my life. Somehow, I was now dating someone else, I only listened to Weezer and My Chemical Romance, and my favorite show was JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And, through some divine intervention, I was reading poetry and allowed the floodgates to open on what sort of things I read and otherwise ingested. At this point, I would never believe anyone talking like this, so here's a bit of the backstory. When I was around 8, my dad and I would visit the $5 DVD bins at Walgreens almost every single weekend. It was there I found the most formative piece of media I'd ever gotten my hands on before high school. I vividly remember this movie having a bright blue cardboard sleeve that reflected in a rainbow shimmer, and front and center was the prettiest creature I had ever seen. The movie, of course, was The Last Unicorn, and I would treat it with more devotion than religion. Every weekend, I would watch it multiple times and try to tell my friends and teachers about it during the week. After rewatching it years later, I have no idea how my dad allowed me to watch this. Then again, this is the man who let me watch Saw before I'd even decided what my favorite Skittles flavor was. Anyway, The Last Unicorn was technically a kids movie, but it was an 80s kids movie, which is a different category. When I brought up the idea of showing it to my friends in high school, they said it had traumatized them as kids. It was dark, gloomy, and violent to them. But I could never imagine that. 8-year-old me was obsessed. The unicorn was so beautiful, and all the colors were potent and exciting. The story was one I could follow, even with the short attention span I've always suffered with, and most importantly, it was soothing. I want to divulge the plot just a little, since I think it is a movie worth watching as blind as possible, but its story is very important to my journey. It starts with the unicorn realizing she's the last of her kind, and as an immortal being, that is a terrifying reality. She vows to find out what happened to the last of the unicorns, but is captured. It is here we find out that very few can actually see her as a unicorn. To most, she is simply seen as a white mare. Eventually, she is aided in her escape and discovers the Red Bull, who is responsible for driving away the rest of the unicorns. The only way she is able to escape is by getting turned into a human by her companion Schmendrick. While she continues on to find where the unicorns are, the longer she is human, the more she forgets, the more she dies, and the more she can feel. As years went on, I forgot about this movie. It was then I decided I knew who I was and was going to be for the rest of my life. Yet, high school shook up everything for me. It happened so insanely that COVID began the end of my middle school years and continued into my high school ones. This was such an isolating period where I had lost one of my friends due to her transphobia, and my other friend got a chronic illness and I wasn't able to see them almost at all. I'd given up on trying to make something of myself, and I accepted my defeat that I would never change and never find a better way. I too felt like the last of something, but the last of something that didn't exist. That's when I got sucked into a very turbulent relationship where I felt like every moment I had to dedicate it to them. One day, I finally had time to visit Barnes & Noble with my friends, and front and center, there was a display covered in gorgeous books. They had green covers with a rainbow inlay design. The pages were slightly stressed on the outside, which made them look mystical. Of course, this book was The Last Unicorn. I had no idea it started as a novel, but it quickly had my attention. I was so excited to read it, only to find it went over my head. Every paragraph was like poetry, and its visuals were complex, and I could not focus on it, and I quickly gave up on it. Later on, I broke up with the person I'd been dating, and suddenly all I felt I had was books. I reread stories I loved until I ran out of them, and I was only left with The Last Unicorn. It was now or never, I told myself, and somehow, at this point in my life, I felt I could actually read it. It was then I realized that at the two lowest points of my life, my parents' divorce and losing major friends and a significant partner, I had access to this story, and I should take advantage of that. If I accepted every paragraph as its own poem, it became beautiful. The tale it told in written format was more intricate and nuanced than the film, and it added a whole new dimension to a story that had already shaped me. When I was younger and only knew the movie, my favorite character was a skeleton, because he was funny.
You do, eh? Answer the riddle then. Tell us the way.
Say please.
Please.
No.
Now, as a teen reading the book, my favorite character was still the skeleton, but this time because he was serious, but not treated as such. One specific quote I wish I could have told myself in middle school came from the skeleton. When I was alive, I believed, as you do, that time was at least as real and solid as myself, and probably more so. I said 1 o'clock as though I could see it, and Monday as though I could find it on the map. And I let myself be hurried along from minute to minute, day to day, year to year, as though I were actually moving from one place to another. Like everyone else, I lived in a house bricked up with seconds and minutes, weekends and New Year's days, and I never went outside until I died, because there was no other door. Now I know that I could have walked through the walls. A lot of these deep character explorations never made it into the movie, unfortunately.
Try me tomorrow. Maybe I'll tell you tomorrow.
But we have no time. We may be too late now.
I have time. I've got time enough for all of us.
We let intangible things define us all the time, and we're deciding for the universe that we cannot grow or change, which, thinking about it, doesn't make sense at all. If we're outside in winter, we'll get cold. If we're put in a new mental environment, like transferring from middle to high school, something is going to happen. Well, after reading The Last Unicorn, it shaped more of my future. I met someone who was obsessed with poetry, and this was the only time in my life where I was finally open to it because of this book. This person introduced me to Richard Siken, and she expressed how influential he was to her. She continued this exploration of poetry in me, where I eventually found two of my favorite poems, The Stag and the Quiver by Richard Siken, and The Weather is Hot on the Back of My Watch by Charles Bukowski. Both, I believe, have become part of me, all because I found a pretty DVD in a $5 bin on a random weekend. The Last Unicorn truly haunts my narrative, as the youth say. I personally don't think much of me has changed since high school, even if I just got broken up with by the recent girlfriend I thought would be my wife. Pearl Jam has been my #1 band for at least 3 years now, and my favorite show is Smiling Friends. Yet, now I love poetry and love to test what kinds of books I like to read or what kinds of stories I consume. I'll read anything from war novels to hockey romance to crime, classics, science fiction, nonfiction, and so forth. There is no page I won't turn, and I don't think that would have happened if I didn't pick up that book for a second time. I think there's also another level to its impact. For every book I've read since 10th grade that I own a copy of, I dedicate a portion of a doc to their annotations. I write down segments I want to highlight later on so that I'm not just messing up a book all willy-nilly. I'm so glad I did this, as I no longer have my copy of The Last Unicorn. In my last year of high school, I felt really alone when it came to a constant adult figure in my life. Until I was able to have a free period with my favorite history teacher. My school did youth service, which was where upperclassmen could help teachers during a free period they had. Luckily, this teacher also had a student teacher, so it was just a reading period for me. He would even lend me books, some of which were banned at a high school level due to content, but being history books, that's very up to interpretation. Speaking of history, there was an acronym in a history class of his that was UNICORN. What did it stand for? No clue, and Google doesn't know either. One day, as I was reading, he took a notice of my copy of The Last Unicorn and said it was something that he had wanted to read. When the end of the school year was getting awfully close, he lent me a book, Murder Most Foul, and since I didn't think I could finish it on time, I traded him my copy of The Last Unicorn. Quite the interesting trade. That all happened over 3 years ago now, and since then, I've gotten through 2 years of college, I've gone through 3 cars, and I've met countless people. I hope he'll lend out this copy like all the ones he lent me. I like to think that my annotated copy of The Last Unicorn is being read by young adults that will go through lives just as impacted by this story as my own. I've always been so comforted by getting secondhand books with annotations, knowing that somebody loved this story as much as I did, And maybe they think about it just as much as I do. Or maybe it impacts them in those subtle ways you never really notice until you look back, just like me. I especially hope they'll notice my second favorite quote, still highlighted in green. He wanted to write poems in that light, and he had never wanted to write poems before.